The year was 1892, and Montana Territory was no place for the faint of heart. Emma Wilson stood alone on the dust-swept platform of the Clearwater station, her single trunk beside her, the afternoon sun beating down mercilessly on her pale skin. She shifted her weight, wincing as pain shot through her left leg, the same leg that had made her an object of pity back in Boston, and now apparently had made her unworthy of the man who had promised to meet her train. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 6 hours had passed since her arrival. The station was nearly empty now, save for the ticketmaster, who occasionally cast sympathetic glances her way. Emma had traveled over 2,000 miles to marry a man she'd never met, a cattle rancher named Thomas Harrington, who had placed an advertisement seeking a practical, God-fearing woman of good character to share in the building of a prosperous future. Their letters had spanned 8 months. Not once had she mentioned her limp, not once had he failed to respond, until today. As the sun began to set and the chill of the mountain evening crept in, Emma faced the bitter truth. There would be no wedding, there would be no home. There was only the cold reality that once again her imperfection had determined her worth in someone's eyes. What Emma couldn't know was that before the night was through, her path would cross with Mason Reed, owner of the Silver Dollar Dance Hall, a man who saw not with ordinary eyes, but with the soul of someone who understood that true grace often came disguised as imperfection. Emma Wilson had been born to a respectable Boston family, the kind that wasn't wealthy enough to be important, but was comfortable enough to maintain appearances. Until she was 6 years old, her life had followed the predictable path of a merchant's daughter. Then came the fever, a vicious, raging inferno that nearly claimed her life and left her with a pronounced limp when it finally released her from its grip. Such a shame, the whispers followed her. Poor Henry Wilson, a daughter with a defect, will be difficult to marry off. Her father, to his credit, never treated her as damaged goods. Her mother, however, viewed Emma's condition as a reflection on the family's standing. By the time Emma reached 25, her younger sisters had all married, leaving her alone with parents who had resigned themselves to supporting an unmarriageable daughter indefinitely. "You'll always have a place with us," her father had said kindly on her 25th birthday, patting her hand across the dinner table. That night, Emma had stared at her reflection in the mirror of her childhood bedroom. The face that looked back at her wasn't unattractive. Chestnut hair that waved gently around an oval face, clear blue eyes, a small nose, and full lips. It was only when she stood and walked that the spell was broken. 2 weeks later, she found the newspaper advertisement while helping her father organize his study. Mail-order brides, connecting Eastern ladies with Western gentlemen of means. Emma had heard of such arrangements, desperate men in the Western territories seeking wives from the more populated East. It was something spoken of in hushed tones. Respectable women didn't resort to such measures. But as she read the column of advertisements, one in particular caught her eye. Montana cattle rancher 32 established a homestead of 640 acres, seeking educated women of good character to share in building a prosperous future, requires practical, nature and fondness for country living, responds to all sincere inquiries. Thomas Harrington, Clearwater, Montana Territory. There was no mention of beauty or physical perfection. Only practicality and education, qualities Emma possessed in abundance. That night, she drafted her first letter to Thomas Harrington, careful to showcase her intelligence, her skills in household management, her experience helping with her father's business ledgers. She enclosed a photograph that showed only her seated form, her face visible but her legs carefully hidden beneath the drape of her skirts. His response came 6 weeks later. Earnest, articulate and filled with descriptions of his ranch, the township of Clearwater, and his hopes for finding a partner who valued hard work and companionship. "I've no use for frivolous city girls," he wrote. "What matters here is fortitude and character." Over the following months, their correspondence deepened. Thomas described building the two-story farmhouse himself, the small orchard he'd planted, the plans for expanding his herd. Emma shared her thoughts on books, her recipes, her hopes for children someday. With each exchange, she felt increasingly certain that this man, this stranger, might value her for her mind and heart rather than judge her for her imperfect body. After 8 months, his proposal arrived. "I believe we would suit each other well as husband and wife. If you agree, I'll send funds for your journey west. We can be married by Reverend Sullivan the day of your arrival." Emma accepted immediately, ignoring her mother's horror and her father's concerns. "This is my chance," she told them, "to be more than just the pitied daughter, the spinster aunt, the burden." Her father had eventually relented, providing her with a modest dowry and helping arrange her journey. Her mother had packed her trunk with linens and household items, her disapproval evident in every crisp fold. "You've not told him about your condition," her mother had stated on the morning of Emma's departure. "It wasn't a question. He values character and practical skills." "My leg doesn't affect either," Emma had replied more confidently than she felt. Her mother's tight-lipped expression spoke volumes. "Men have specific expectations of a wife, Emma, particularly men in such rustic circumstances." Now standing, alone at Clearwater Station as darkness fell, those words returned to haunt her. Had Thomas Harrington received her final letter announcing her arrival date? Had he changed his mind? Or had he been there among the crowd, seen her limping down the train steps and quietly withdrawn without revealing himself? "Miss, we are closing the station for the night," the ticketmaster called, sympathy and impatience mingling in his voice. "Is there someone I can help you contact?" Emma blinked back tears. "I was to meet my fiancé, Thomas Harrington. Do you know him?" The ticketmaster's expression changed subtly. "Harrington's place is about 10 miles northwest of town, but I haven't seen him in a couple weeks." He hesitated. "There's a boarding house run by Widow Parker 3 streets over. Respectable place. You could stay there tonight." Emma nodded numbly, the reality of her situation sinking in. She had exactly $27 to her name, enough for perhaps a week's lodging. After that, "I'll need to hire someone to take me to Mr. Harrington's ranch tomorrow," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The ticketmaster coughed, uncomfortably. "Well now, that might be, I mean to say, if the gentleman hasn't come to meet you as arranged. I've traveled over 2,000 miles, sir. I intend to at least hear from Mr. Harrington's own lips why he's reconsidered our arrangement." The forced confidence in her voice surprised even Emma. With directions to the boarding house and the promise of assistance with her trunk in the morning, Emma began the 3-block walk, her left leg dragging slightly more than usual after the long hours of standing. Clearwater was a typical frontier town, a main street lined with false-fronted businesses, muddy side streets dotted with modest homes, the imposing structures of a church and schoolhouse standing as twin sentinels of civilization. As she walked, Emma noted the mercantile, the telegraph office, a small restaurant, and a doctor's office. Dominating the far end of the street was a 2-story building with a large sign proclaiming it the Silver Dollar Dance Hall and Saloon. Despite her exhaustion and despair, Emma found herself cataloguing these details with the practical eye she'd developed helping her father. Clearwater was clearly prospering. The businesses looked established, the sidewalks were wooden rather than dirt, and several buildings featured glass windows rather than oiled paper. The Widow Parker's boarding house proved to be a neat, white-painted structure with a small garden in front. The widow herself was a brisk, grey-haired woman who eyed Emma's simple travelling dress with quick assessment. 75 cents a night, including breakfast, $1.50 with all meals, she stated without preamble. No gentlemen visitors in the rooms, no liquor on the premises, and quiet hours after 9. I understand. I'll take the full board option, please. Just for a few days. Emma fumbled with her reticule. The widow's expression softened slightly as she noticed Emma's limp. You're a long way from home, I'd guess. Boston? Yes. How did you know? The accent. And the quality of that dress, though it's seen better days. The widow gestured for Emma to follow her up a narrow staircase. What brings a Boston lady to Clearwater? We don't get many Easterners, especially unaccompanied women. Emma hesitated. I was to meet someone. He appears to have been delayed. The widow stopped at the top of the stairs, turning to study Emma's face with shrewd eyes. Thomas Harrington's mail-order bride, are you? Emma couldn't contain her surprise. You know about me? Widow Parker's expression was unreadable. Small. Town. News travels. Come along, I'll show you to your room. The room was small but clean. A narrow bed with an iron frame, a washstand with pitcher and bowl, a 3-drawer chest, and a small window overlooking the back garden. After the widow left, Emma sank onto the bed, finally allowing the tears she'd been holding back all day. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She had been a fool, a desperate, hopeful fool to believe that any man would overlook her imperfection once he saw it. Thomas Harrington had probably watched her from a distance, decided she wasn't what he wanted, and simply left her to her fate. And what was that fate now? Her family was 3 weeks' journey away. Her funds would last perhaps 10 days. She had no friends, no connections, and no prospects in this rugged mountain town. For the first time since she'd made the decision to come west, Emma allowed herself to admit the magnitude of her miscalculation. She had gambled everything on Thomas Harrington's character, a man she knew only through carefully crafted letters. Morning brought no relief to Emma's spirits, but it did bring clarity. After a night of intermittent sleep, she had decided on a course of action. She would hire transportation to Thomas Harrington's ranch. She would confront him directly. And regardless of the outcome, she would find a way to support herself in Clearwater until she could save enough for a return ticket to Boston. Widow Parker provided a breakfast of cornmeal, mush, bacon, and strong coffee. The other boarders, 2 male clerks from the mercantile and an elderly female schoolteacher, eyed Emma curiously, but maintained polite conversation. Miss Wilson is looking to hire someone to take her out to Harrington Place today, the widow announced as she refilled coffee cups. Mr. Jensen, don't your brother run a wagon service? The older of the 2 clerks nodded. He does, ma'am, but he's taken a load up to the Richardson mining camp. Won't be back for 3 days. I could take her. All heads turned to the doorway where a tall, broad-shouldered man in his mid-30s stood, hat in hand. His clothing was of good quality, though not fashionable. Dark trousers, a blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and a leather vest. His face was tanned from the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes, suggesting he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now. Mason Reed, the widow said with a nod that wasn't entirely approving. I wasn't expecting you this morning. Came by to settle Jenkins' tab as promised. The man, Mason, shifted his gaze to Emma. You're looking to get out to Harrington's place. Emma straightened her spine. I am. Are you acquainted with Mr. Harrington? A shadow passed over Mason's features. You could say that. He glanced at the widow. I've got business that way myself. Could take the lady out there, save her the expense of hiring Jensen's wagon. The widow's lips thinned. Miss Wilson, Mr. Reed here owns the silver dollar. It might not be appropriate. I own a legitimate business establishment, Mrs. Parker. Mason interrupted mildly. And I'm offering the lady a courtesy ride, not employment. Emma looked between them, sensing undercurrents she didn't understand, but practicality won out over propriety. I would appreciate the transportation, Mr. Reed. If it's truly no imposition, I can be ready in 15 minutes, Mason nodded. I'll bring the buggy around the front. After he left, the widow leaned close to Emma. Mr. Reed runs a respectable enough establishment by frontier standards, but he's still a saloon owner. In Boston, you wouldn't be seen in his company. We're not in Boston, Emma replied simply, and I need to see Mr. Harrington today. Something in the widow's expression shifted. Yes, I suppose you do. She patted Emma's hand. Your room will be waiting, whatever comes of it. 20 minutes later, Emma found herself seated beside Mason Reed in a well-maintained buggy pulled by a handsome bay gelding. Her trunk had been left at the boarding house. This journey might end with her engagement intact, or it might reveal that she had no future with Thomas Harrington. Either way, she hadn't wanted to appear presumptuous by bringing her belongings. They traveled in silence for the first mile, leaving the town behind and following a well-worn road that curved through stands of pine and aspen. Emma kept her gaze fixed ahead, acutely aware of the man beside her. Despite his occupation, there was nothing crude or threatening about Mason Reed. He handled the horse with quiet confidence, his posture relaxed but alert. "Beautiful country," Emma finally commented, the silence becoming uncomfortable. Mason nodded. "Different from Boston, I imagine." "Very. Everything's so vast. In Boston, the buildings crowd together so closely that sometimes you forget there's sky above." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "That's what drew me west. Space to breathe." He glanced at her. "Most Easterners find it unsettling at first." "I find it exhilarating," Emma admitted, "even if it's also rather intimidating." They fell into silence again until Mason spoke suddenly. "Miss Wilson, there's something you should know before we reach Harrington's place." Emma's heart stuttered. "Yes?" Mason slowed the horse, turning slightly to face her. His expression was grave, his grey eyes direct. "Thomas Harrington died 3 weeks ago, thrown from his horse while checking fence lines. His funeral was 12 days ago." The world seemed to stop. Emma stared at him, unable to process his words. "That's not possible. I received a telegram from him just before I left Boston, confirming arrangements." Mason's gaze was steady, sympathetic. "The telegram office often holds messages to send in batches. It might have been sent before the accident, but delivered after." "But surely someone would have—" Emma's voice trailed off as realization dawned. "No one knew to contact me. From what I understand, Harrington kept mostly to himself. Few people knew he was corresponding with a potential bride." Mason hesitated. "I'm sorry you've come all this way for nothing, Miss Wilson." Emma turned away, staring blindly at the passing landscape as she struggled to absorb this devastating news. Not rejection, then. Death. Thomas Harrington hadn't abandoned her at the station out of disappointment. He simply no longer existed, and neither did the future she had imagined for herself. "I still want to see the ranch," she said finally, her voice barely audible. Mason studied her face. "Are you certain? There's nothing there for you now." "I spent 8 months exchanging letters with Thomas Harrington. I came 2,000 miles to be his wife. I need to see where he lived, where I would have lived." Emma met his gaze, her chin lifting slightly. "Please." After a moment, Mason nodded and flicked the reins, urging the horse forward. "His foreman's been keeping things running. Man named Frank Caldwell. Good man." They rode in silence for another 20 minutes before Mason turned the buggy onto a narrower track that wound upward. As they created a small rise, Emma caught her breath. Below them stretched a picturesque valley, centered around a 2-story white farmhouse with a broad porch. A large barn, Several outbuildings and extensive corrals formed a rough half-circle. Behind it, a creek meandered through rich pasture land where cattle grazed, and in the distance mountains rose majestically against the sky. "It's beautiful," Emma whispered. "Harrington built it from nothing," Mason said quietly. 10 years of hard work. As they approached the house, a lean, weathered man emerged from the barn. He watched their arrival with obvious wariness, one hand resting near his hip. Mason raised a hand in greeting as he brought the buggy to a halt. "Afternoon, Frank. This is Miss Emma Wilson, from Boston." The man's eyebrows shot up in recognition. "Miss Wilson, you were Thomas Harrington's fiancée," Emma confirmed, her voice steadier than she felt. "I've only just learned of his passing. Mr. Reed was kind enough to bring me out to see the ranch anyway." Frank Caldwell removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached hair and a deeply tanned face creased with recent grief. "I'm powerful sorry, ma'am. Mr. Harrington was looking forward to your arrival. Had us all busy getting the house ready these past few weeks." Emma blinked back sudden tears. "Thank you for telling me that." Frank glanced uncertainly between Emma and Mason. "Would you like to see inside the house, ma'am? Mr. Harrington had the parlor fixed up real nice. Said you'd written about liking yellow flowers, so he had the walls painted to match." A sob escaped. Before Emma could stop it, Mason's hand moved as if to touch her arm but retreated. Instead, he jumped down from the buggy and came around to her side, offering his hand to help her down. Emma hesitated before placing her gloved hand in his much larger one. As she stepped down, her bad leg nearly buckled, and she clutched his arm to steady herself. If Mason noticed her disability, his expression gave nothing away. "I'd like to see everything," Emma said, composing herself, "if it's not too much trouble." "No trouble at all, ma'am," Frank assured her. For the next hour, Emma walked through what would have been her home. The farmhouse was solidly built and surprisingly refined for a frontier dwelling. The parlor was indeed painted a soft yellow, with curtains that matched. The kitchen was large and well-equipped. Upstairs, a master bedroom featured a handcrafted bed frame and a dressing table positioned before a window with a view of the mountains. "He ordered that special from Denver," Frank explained, nodding to the dressing table. "Said a lady would appreciate having a nice place to do her hair and such." In every room, Emma saw evidence of Thomas Harrington's preparations for a wife. Fresh paint, new furnishings, small touches that spoke of consideration and care. By the time they returned, downstairs, Emma's heart was heavy with grief for a man she had never met but had come to know through his letters, and now his home. "What will happen to the ranch now?" she asked as they stood on the front porch. Frank sighed. "That's complicated, ma'am. Mr. Harrington had no family that anyone knows of. His lawyer in town, Mr. Simmons, is trying to sort things out. For now, I'm keeping operations running, but without a clear owner." He shrugged helplessly. Emma nodded, understanding the uncertainty. How strange that she and this ranch shared the same precarious fate, both left adrift by Thomas Harrington's untimely death. As they prepared to leave, Frank disappeared into the house, returning with a small wooden box. "Mr. Harrington kept your letters in here, ma'am, and the photograph you sent, I expect you should have them now." Emma accepted the box with trembling hands. "Thank you." The ride back to town was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached Clearwater, Mason finally broke the silence. "What will you do now, Miss Wilson?" It was the question Emma had been turning over in her mind since hearing of Thomas's death. "I have limited funds, enough for perhaps 10 days of board. After that," she took a deep breath, "I'll need employment. I'm educated. I can keep accounts, write correspondence. Perhaps there's a business in town that could use such skills." Mason was quiet for a moment. "It won't be easy. Frontier towns have limited opportunities for women, mostly teaching, laundering, cooking, or—" He didn't finish the thought, or working in establishments like yours?" Emma supplied more composure than she felt. His jaw tightened. "That wasn't what I was suggesting." "Of course not. Forgive me." She stared at her gloved hands. "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Reed, and I have nowhere else to go." As they reached the main street of Clearwater, the Silver Dollar came into view, its windows dark in the afternoon light. Mason pulled the buggy to a stop, not in front of the boarding house, as Emma expected, but beside his own establishment. "Miss Wilson, I have a proposition for you. It's not what you came west for, but it might solve your immediate problem." Emma regarded him warily. "I'm listening." Mason's grey eyes met hers directly. "I need someone to manage the accounts for the Silver Dollar. My previous bookkeeper left for Denver 2 weeks ago. The work is respectable. You'd have an office separate from the saloon itself. The pay is $40 a month, plus a room above the office." Emma blinked in surprise. "You're offering me employment? You don't know anything about me." A small smile lifted one corner of his mouth. "I know you had the courage to travel across the country, to marry a man you'd never met. I know you insisted on seeing his ranch even after learning he was dead. And I know you have a practical mind. You're already planning how to support yourself rather than despairing of your situation. And my disability doesn't concern you?" The question slipped out before Emma could stop it. Mason's gaze dropped briefly to her left leg, then returned to her face without a hint of pity. "Why would it, unless you believe bookkeeping requires dancing?" For the first time since arriving in Clearwater, Emma felt a glimmer of hope. People will talk. A respectable woman working at a saloon. "People always talk," Mason replied with a shrug. "But the Silver Dollar isn't just a saloon. The dance hall takes up the larger portion of the building. We host community events, traveling shows, and Saturday night dances. It's the cultural center of Clearwater, for better or worse." Emma considered his offer. Employment, independence, a purpose beyond being Thomas Harrington's wife. "I'll need to think about it," she said finally. Mason nodded, taking up the reins. "Again, sleep on it. I'll call for your answer tomorrow." He guided the buggy toward the boarding house. "For what it's worth, Miss Wilson, I believe you would have made Thomas Harrington a fine wife." As Emma stepped down from the buggy outside the boarding house, she felt the weight of the small wooden box containing her letters to a dead man. For months she had poured her hopes and dreams into those pages, crafting a future that would now never exist. But perhaps, just perhaps, there was a different future waiting for her in this rugged Montana town. Not the one she had journeyed so far to claim, but one she might forge for herself instead. Emma spent a restless night at Widow Parker's boarding house. The wooden box containing her letters to Thomas Harrington sat on the small dresser, a painful reminder of dreams that would never materialize. By morning, she had reached a decision. After breakfast, she approached Widow Parker in the kitchen. "I'd like to inquire about extending my stay for another week," Emma said. "And I wonder if you might direct me to Mr. Simmons, the lawyer Mr. Caldwell mentioned." The widow wiped her hands on her apron. "Planning to contest Harrington's estate, are you? Can't say I blame you, making the journey all this way." "No," Emma replied firmly. "I have no legal claim on Mr. Harrington's property, but I'd like to understand what will happen to the ranch. And I need to consider Mr. Reed's employment offer." Widow Parker's eyebrows shot up. "Mason Reed offered you a position? Doing what exactly?" "Bookkeeping," Emma replied, lifting her chin slightly. "In an office, separate from the saloon proper." The older woman studied her for a long moment. "Reed's establishment may not be entirely respectable, but the man himself has never given cause for scandal. Pays his debts, helps those in need, keeps the rowdier elements in check." She sighed. "This isn't Boston, Miss Wilson. A woman in your situation can't afford to be overly particular." Emma nodded. "Thank you for your candor." An hour later, Emma found herself in the tidy office of James Simmons, attorney at law. The lawyer was a slender man with spectacles and a thoughtful demeanor who listened carefully as Emma explained her connection to Thomas Harrington. "I'm aware of Mr. Harrington's intention to marry," Simmons confirmed. "He consulted me about adding a wife to his property deed." He shuffled through some papers on his desk. "However, without an actual marriage having taken place, you have no legal standing regarding his estate." "I understand that," Emma assured him. "I'm merely curious about what will happen to the ranch. Mr. Harrington's letters spoke so passionately about the land and the home he built." Simmons removed his spectacles, polishing them with a handkerchief. "The situation is complicated. In the absence of a will or clear heirs, the property would normally escheat to the territory. However, Mr. Harrington had a substantial bank loan against the property for recent expansion of his herd. The bank may move to foreclose unless the loan is serviced." "I see," Emma said quietly. Another piece of Thomas Harrington's dream crumbling. "Away. If you don't mind my asking, Miss Wilson, what are your plans now? Montana Territory can be unforgiving for a woman alone." Emma straightened her shoulders. "Mr. Reed has offered me employment as a bookkeeper for his establishment. I'm inclined to accept." If Simmons was surprised, he concealed it well. Reed is well respected in business matters, despite the nature of his enterprise. The position would provide you with independence at least. As Emma left the lawyer's office, she paused on the sidewalk, gazing down the street toward the Silver Dollar. The morning sun glinted off its large front windows. A sign painter was touching up the gold lettering on the facade, balancing precariously on a ladder. With determined steps, Emma made her way toward the building. Her decision was made. Pride had no place in survival. The front doors of the Silver Dollar were propped open, allowing fresh air into the cavernous main room. Unlike Emma's imaginings, the interior was surprisingly well appointed. Yes, there was the long bar of polished mahogany and tables for card games. But beyond that stretched a large open space with a wooden dance floor. A small stage occupied an end, and the walls featured paintings of mountain landscapes rather than the tawdry images she'd expected. A piano stood in one corner, its surface gleaming with polish. High windows allow natural light to flood the space during daylight hours. It was nothing like the dark, smoky den of iniquity she had pictured. "We don't open until noon," called a woman's voice. Emma turned to see a statuesque woman in her 40s emerging from a back room. Her dress, while fashionable, was modest enough for daytime, and her dark hair was arranged in a simple but elegant style. "I'm looking for Mr. Reed," Emma explained. "I'm Emma Wilson." Recognition dawned in the woman's eyes. "The mail-order bride. Mason mentioned you." She approached, extending her hand. "Vivian Blackwood, I manage the girls." Emma hesitated before shaking the offered hand. "The girls?" Vivian laughed, a rich, warm sound. "The dancers, honey. This is a dance hall, after all." She gestured toward the stage. 3 nights a week we present a variety of entertainment. Songs, recitations, the occasional traveling performer. Saturday nights are for dancing. The men pay for dance tickets, 25 cents per dance with one of our girls. All very proper, with at least 6 inches between partners. Emma blinked, realizing she'd misunderstood the nature of the dance hall portion of Mason Reed's business. "I see. Mason said he offered you the bookkeeping position," Vivian continued, leading Emma toward a door at the side of the main room. "This would be your office, completely separate, as you can see. There's a private entrance from the side street as well, so you needn't come through the main doors if it bothers you." The office was small but neat, containing a desk, chair, filing cabinet, and a small coal stove for heat. A second door led to a narrow staircase. "The apartment is upstairs," Vivian explained. "Nothing fancy, but private. One bedroom, a sitting room with a cook stove, and a washroom. Mason had running water installed last year, one of the first buildings in town to have it." Emma was surprised by the accommodations. They were far better than she had expected, and certainly more private than the boarding house. "Is Mr. Reed available?" she asked. "He'll be back shortly." "Gone to the bank." Vivian studied Emma with shrewd eyes. "You're not what I expected." "Oh?" "Most women in your situation would have taken the first train east by now, running home to my family." Emma's chin lifted slightly. "I have my pride, Mrs. Blackwood, but I also have a practical nature. My family made it clear that my departure was permanent. I need to make my own way now." Vivian nodded approvingly. "Well, you'll find Clearwater has its own way of sorting people out. Those too rigid to bend with the wind don't last long here." She smiled. "I suspect you have more steel in your spine than folks might guess at first glance." The sound of boots on the wooden floor announced Mason Reed's arrival. He stopped short at the sight of Emma in the office doorway. "Miss Wilson, I wasn't expecting you until later." "I saw no reason to delay my decision," Emma replied. "If the position is still available, I'd like to accept." A smile spread across Mason's face, transforming his features. "It is, and I'm glad to hear it." He glanced at Vivian. "I see you've met my business partner." This was a surprise. "Partner." "Vivian owns 30% of the Silver Dollar," Mason explained. "We built it together 8 years ago, when Clearwater was nothing but a few shacks and a lot of hope." Vivian patted Mason's arm affectionately. "He had the money. I had the experience. Made sense to join forces." Emma reassessed the relationship between them, sensing none of the impropriety she had initially assumed. "When would you like me to start?" she asked. "Tomorrow would be fine," Mason replied. "The books are somewhat in disarray since Walter left. I've been doing my best, but numbers aren't my strong suit." "I'll bring my things from the boarding house this afternoon then," Emma decided. As she turned to leave, Mason cleared his throat. "Miss Wilson, there's something else you should know. About Saturday nights." Emma paused, wondering what new revelation awaited. "The dance hall is open to the public on Saturdays. Regular folk from town, not just the usual saloon crowd. Families. Sometimes there's a caller for square dances and we clear the tables for a proper social." He hesitated. "What I'm saying is, you'd be welcome to attend. As a guest, not an employee." The invitation caught Emma off guard. "That's very kind, but I don't dance, Mr. Reed." Mason's gaze dropped briefly to her left leg before returning to her face. There was something in his expression she couldn't quite read. "Everyone dances, Miss Wilson. Some just haven't found the right music yet." Before Emma could respond to this puzzling statement, he excused himself to attend to business. Vivian gave her a knowing look before following Mason, leaving Emma to ponder this unexpected turn in her Montana adventure. That afternoon, as Emma packed her few belongings at the boarding house, Widow Parker made one last attempt to dissuade. "Her, a respectable woman living above a saloon," she clucked. "What would your Boston family say? They relinquished their right to opinions about my life when they sent me west to marry a stranger," Emma replied, more sharply than she intended. She softened her tone. "I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Parker, truly. But I need to secure my future, and Mr. Reed is offering fair compensation for work I'm well qualified to perform." The widow sighed. "Well, my door's always open if you find the situation unsuitable." By dusk, Emma was settled into her new quarters above the Silver Dollar. The apartment was basic, but clean, with simple furniture and windows that looked out over the side street and, from the bedroom, offered a view of the distant mountains. She could hear the muffled sounds of the saloon below, the piano playing, occasional laughter, the clink of glasses. Strange to think that just 3 days ago she had stepped off the train expecting to be met by her future husband. Now she was alone in a frontier town, employed by a dance hall owner, mourning a man she'd never met. As she unpacked the small wooden box containing her letters to Thomas, Emma felt a sense of closing one chapter of her life and beginning another. Tomorrow, she will start organizing the Silver Dollars accounts. Tonight, she would allow herself one last evening of grief for the future that might have been. What she couldn't know was that Mason Reed had just returned from a private meeting with James Simmons, the lawyer, where the subject had been the Harrington Ranch, and a proposition that would soon intertwine their fates in ways neither could imagine. Emma's first week as bookkeeper for the Silver Dollar proved more challenging than she had anticipated. The previous bookkeeper, Walter, had maintained the records with a system that seemed designed to confuse anyone but himself. Columns didn't add up, entries were missing dates, and entire weeks of transactions appeared to have been recorded based on memory rather than receipts. "I'm beginning to think Walter was embezzling," Emma told Mason on her 4th day, surrounded by ledgers spread across her desk. Mason leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "That had occurred to me. Can you determine how much? I'll need at least another week to untangle this mess, but I'd estimate several $100s over the past year." She tapped her pencil against the latest ledger. He was clever about it. Small amounts here and there, mostly from the liquor. "Inventory, I'm not surprised. Walter had a weakness for gambling." Mason straightened. "You're proving your worth already, Miss Wilson." Despite herself, Emma felt a flush of pleasure at his approval. "I'm only doing the job you hired me for." With more skill than I expected. Most bookkeepers I've encountered can follow a system but struggle to correct one that's been corrupted. He studied her with those direct grey eyes. "You have a natural talent for numbers. My father taught me. He believed women should understand business matters, even if society disagrees." Mason smiled. "Your father sounds like a sensible man." "He was," Emma agreed, then corrected herself. "He is, though I doubt he'd approve of my current employment." A shadow crossed Mason's face. "I understand the Silver Dollar isn't what you imagined for yourself when you traveled west." "Few things have been," Emma replied softly. An awkward silence fell between them, broken by the arrival of Vivian with a tray. "I've brought you lunch, Emma. You missed it upstairs." She set down a plate of stew and fresh bread. "Mason, the new whiskey shipment is here. The driver's asking for you." After Mason left, Vivian settled into the chair opposite Emma's desk. "He likes you," she observed bluntly. Emma kept her eyes on the ledger. "Mr. Reed appreciates competence in his employees." "That's not what I meant, and you know it." Vivian's tone was amused rather than accusatory. "I haven't seen him hover around an employee like this since, well, ever. I'm a novelty, nothing more. The mail-order bride who stayed." Emma changed the subject. "Mrs. Blackwood, these ledgers suggest you handle the entertainment contracts. Is that correct?" Vivian allowed the diversion. "Yes, I book the performers and manage the dancers. And please, call me Vivian." "Mrs. Blackwood makes me feel ancient. These contracts seem quite detailed," Emma noted, examining a recent agreement. "Specifying conduct, attire, even restricting where performers may socialize in town. Protection," Vivian explained, "for them and for us. The Silver Dollar maintains standards higher than most establishments of its kind. Our dancers don't entertain gentlemen privately. Our performers don't appear intoxicated on stage." Her expression turned serious. "Mason and I built this place to be something the town could be proud of, not just tolerate." Emma was beginning to understand that the Silver Dollar occupied a unique position in Clearwater. Not quite respectable by Eastern standards, but apparently held in higher regard than she had initially assumed. "Will you attend the dance tomorrow night?" Vivian asked, rising to leave. "I hadn't planned to," You should consider it. Might help you understand your new home better." With that cryptic suggestion, Vivian departed, leaving Emma to ponder her use of the word home. By Saturday evening, Emma had made remarkable progress with the accounts. She'd worked late into the night several times, finding satisfaction in bringing order to chaos. The sound of music and laughter from below had become a familiar backdrop to her concentration. As she prepared for bed, the music downstairs changed. From the usual piano tunes to something more structured. A fiddle had joined in, and she could hear the rhythmic thump of many feet on the wooden floor. The Saturday night dance was in full swing. Curiosity finally overcame her reluctance. Emma changed from her nightgown back into her day dress and made her way downstairs, using the private entrance that connected to the side of the building. She slipped in through a side door to the main hall, hanging back in the shadows to observe. The transformation was remarkable. The saloon had disappeared, replaced by a proper dance hall. Tables and chairs lined the walls, leaving the wooden floor open for dancing. Couples moved in organized patterns as a caller shouted instructions for a lively square dance. The crowd was indeed mixed, respectable townspeople alongside the usual saloon patrons. Women in their best dresses dancing with miners still dusty from the day's work. "Decided to join us after all?" Emma startled at Mason's voice beside her. He was dressed more formally than usual, in a clean white shirt and dark vest, his hair neatly combed. "I was curious," she admitted. "Come, I'll show you to a seat where you can watch properly." He offered his arm, seemingly unconcerned about being seen escorting his bookkeeper in public. Emma hesitated only briefly before placing her hand on his arm. As they moved along the edge of the dance floor toward a vacant chair, she noticed the curious glances from townsfolk. Word of her presence in Clearwater had clearly spread. Once seated, Emma found herself approached by several women who introduced themselves as shopkeepers' wives, the telegraph operator's sister, and the schoolteacher. Their curiosity was thinly veiled beneath welcome, but Emma answered their questions with as much grace as she could muster. "Such a shame about Mr. Harrington," said Mrs. Collins, the mercantile owner's wife. "He was a fine man." "You're fortunate Mr. Reed had a position available," added Miss Thompson, the schoolteacher, with a meaningful look that suggested her approval was conditional. "Indeed I am," Emma replied evenly. "The Silver Dollar maintains excellent business. Records." The music paused as the current dance ended. The caller announced a waltz would follow, and the fiddle began a gentle, swaying melody. Couples formed on the floor, men bowing to their partners before taking them in a loose embrace appropriate for public dancing. Emma watched with a pang of wistfulness. She hadn't danced since before her illness as a child. Her dance master in Boston had dismissed her afterward, stating bluntly that no gentleman would choose a partner who couldn't follow the steps properly. "May I have this dance?" Mason stood before her, hand extended, his expression unreadable. Emma's cheeks warmed with embarrassment. "That's very kind, Mr. Reed, but I don't dance." "Because you can't, or because you won't?" The directness of the question took her aback. My leg makes it difficult to follow the steps correctly." Mason hadn't withdrawn his hand. "The waltz requires only that you can turn in a circle, Miss Wilson, and I'm an excellent leader." The women seated nearby were watching with undisguised interest. To refuse now would create exactly the kind of scene Emma had hoped to avoid. "Very well," she conceded, placing her hand in his. "But I warn you, your toes may suffer." His smile was warm as he led her to the floor. "I'll risk it." Taking their position among the other couples, Mason placed his right hand lightly at her waist, maintaining a proper distance between them. His left hand held hers firmly but gently. "Follow my lead," he murmured. "Don't think about the steps. Just feel the music." As they began to move, Emma's stiffness made their first turns awkward. She fixed her gaze on his shoulder, acutely aware of her ungainly movements. Look at me, not at your feet, Mason instructed softly. Trust me to guide you. Emma raised her eyes to his face, finding no mockery there, only encouragement. Gradually, she allowed him to take more of her weight during the turns, compensating for her weaker leg. To her surprise, they began to move more fluidly. There, he said approvingly. You see, you can dance. A tentative smile touched Emma's lips as they glided across the floor. She was dancing, not with the grace of the other women perhaps, but dancing nonetheless. For these few minutes, her disability seemed less defining, less limiting. Why did you ask me to dance? She couldn't help asking. There are plenty of more accomplished partners available. Mason's expression grew thoughtful. I watched you tackle those ledgers all week, approaching a daunting task with determination instead of complaint. It made me wonder what else you might accomplish if given the chance. The simple honesty of his answer touched something deep within Emma. No one had ever looked at her and seen possibility rather than limitation. As the waltz ended, Mason led her back to her seat. Thank you for the dance, Miss Wilson. Emma found herself unable to summon a flippant response. Thank you for asking, Mr. Reed. The evening continued with more energetic dances that Emma observed from her seat. She noticed that Mason danced with several other women, including Vivian and some of the regular dance hall girls, maintaining his role as host. Yet twice more he returned to ask Emma for the slower waltzes, each time guiding her with the same attentive care. By the time she retired to her apartment, something had shifted in Emma's perception of both Mason Reed and her place in Clearwater. This frontier town operated by different rules than Boston society. Here, a woman might be judged more by her character and capabilities than by a physical imperfection. The following morning, Emma was surprised by a knock at her private entrance. Opening the door, she found Mason on her doorstep, dressed in riding clothes. Good morning, Miss Wilson. I apologize for the early intrusion, but I have a proposition I'd like to discuss with you. Might you join me for a drive? Intrigued, Emma agreed, changing quickly into her Sunday dress. 20 minutes later, they were traveling in Mason's buggy along a now familiar road, the one leading to the Harrington Ranch. May I ask the purpose of this visit? Emma finally inquired as they created the rise overlooking the valley. Mason drew the horse to a halt, turning to face her. I've been in discussions with Mr. Simmons about the Harrington property. He hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. I'm considering purchasing it. The bank is willing to transfer the loan if someone assumes ownership quickly. Emma felt a strange mixture of emotions at this news. I see, and you wanted my opinion because you were to be its mistress, Mason replied simply. But also because I have a business proposition for you. Emma waited, puzzled by the intensity in his expression. The dance hall does well, but it's reached the limits of what Clearwater can support. I've been looking to expand my interests. He gestured toward the valley below. Harrington built something valuable here. With the right management, it could be more profitable still. And what does this have to do with me? Emma asked. I'm proposing a partnership. I have the capital to purchase the property and maintain operations. You have the head for figures and the education to help run it properly. He met her gaze directly. We could build something significant together, Miss Wilson, a legitimate business venture that would secure your future in Clearwater. Emma stared at him, struggling to process his suggestion. You hardly know me, Mr. Reed. Why would you offer such an opportunity? Mason's expression softened. I know enough. I know you've faced hardship with dignity. I know you approach challenges with intelligence and determination. And I know that Thomas Harrington chose well when he asked you to share his life here. The reference to Thomas brought a fresh pang of grief. This was to be his legacy. And it can still be, in a way. the land he loved, the home he built, preserved rather than lost to the bank. Mason's voice grew quieter. "I'm not offering charity, Emma. This would be a business arrangement with contracts drawn up properly. You would earn your ownership share through work and management." The use of her first name didn't escape Emma's notice, nor was the respect evident in his proposal. He wasn't offering her a handout, but a chance to build something through her own efforts. As the morning sun highlighted the beauty of the valley below, Emma considered how dramatically her circumstances had changed in just 1 week. From abandoned bride to potential ranch owner, it was almost too much to comprehend. "I'll need time to consider your offer," she said finally. Mason nodded, seemingly pleased rather than disappointed by her caution. "Take all the time you need. The offer stands." As they continued down the road toward the ranch house, where Frank Caldwell awaited them for a tour of the operations, Emma found herself contemplating not just Mason's business proposition, but the man himself. A saloon owner with the vision to see beyond her limp to her capabilities. A dance partner who had shown her that limitations existed primarily in one's mind, and perhaps, though she hardly dared acknowledge it even to herself, a man who stirred. Feelings she had never expected to experience in this remote Montana town. 2 weeks after Mason's business proposition, Emma found herself standing on the porch of what was now officially the Reed and Wilson Ranch. The contracts had been signed yesterday in Mr. Simmons' office, establishing their partnership with clear terms that protected both their interests. The autumn air carried a crisp bite, warning of the approaching winter. Emma pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she gazed out over the pastures, where the cattle grazed. Frank Caldwell had proved invaluable during the transition, explaining the operation in detail and introducing Emma to the ranch hands, most of whom had chosen to stay on under the new ownership. "Coffee, ma'am?" Frank appeared at her elbow, offering a steaming mug. "Thank you, Frank." Emma accepted gratefully, warming her hands around the cup. The men seemed to be adjusting well to the change. Frank nodded. "They're good workers. Most were loyal to the land more than to Mr. Harrington specifically." He hesitated. "Begging your pardon, but they're curious about your arrangement with Mr. Reed. Some are wondering if there's more to it than business." Emma had anticipated this. Frontier communities thrived on gossip, and her unusual situation provided ample fodder. "You can assure them it's strictly a business partnership. Mr. Reed recognized my skills with numbers and management, nothing more." Even as she spoke the words, Emma questioned their complete truth. The dance they had shared, the respect in Mason's eyes when he proposed their partnership, these suggested complexities beyond mere business. "Mr. Reed's coming up the road," Frank noted, pointing to a figure on horseback approaching from town. Emma's heart quickened inexplicably. Mason had been dividing his time between the ranch and the Silver Dollar, leaving Vivian to manage the dance hall more independently while he focused on learning the cattle business. His dedication to making their partnership succeed had impressed Emma considerably. "I'll leave you to your meeting," Frank said with a knowing smile that Emma chose to ignore. Mason dismounted at the hitching post, removing his hat as he climbed the porch steps. The weeks of outdoor work had added color to his face, making his gray eyes seem even more striking. "Good morning, Emma. How are the accounts looking?" She smiled at his predictable first question. "Promising. If cattle prices hold through spring, we should be able to pay down a significant portion of the bank note." "Excellent." He accepted the coffee she poured from the pot Frank had left. "And how are you finding ranch life? Different from bookkeeping. At the Silver Dollar, I imagine." "Quieter," Emma admitted, "though I miss Vivian's colorful commentary on the customers." Mason's laugh was warm. "She's asking when you'll visit. Says the new bookkeeper asks too many questions and doesn't appreciate her flair for creative expense descriptions." The easy camaraderie that had developed between them over the past weeks made these morning meetings the highlight of Emma's day. Mason treated her as a true partner, valuing her opinions and deferring to her expertise with finances. In turn, she respected his practical knowledge and business instincts. "I've been thinking about expansion," Mason said, settling into the chair beside hers. "The north pasture could support another 100 heads if we improve the water access." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I've been reviewing the maps. If we divert part of the creek, we could—" Her words were interrupted by the arrival of a wagon coming. Fast up the drive, Emma recognized Mrs. Collins from the Mercantile at the Rains, driving with unusual haste. Mason rose, concerned about etching his features. "Something's wrong." They met Mrs. Collins as she pulled the wagon to a stop. "Mr. Reed, Miss Wilson," she called, breathless with urgency. "There's been an accident in town. The chandelier in the Silver Dollar collapsed during cleaning. Vivian's hurt bad." Emma's hand flew to her mouth in shock. Mason was already moving, calling for his horse to be brought back. "I'll come with you," Emma decided instantly. "No need for both of us to go," Mason began, but Emma cut him off. "Vivian is my friend too, Mason, and you may need help with the business while she recovers." The ride to town was tense and silent, the wagon rattling over the rutted road at dangerous speed. Upon reaching Clearwater, they headed straight for Dr. Wallace's office, where Vivian had been taken. The doctor met them in his small waiting room, his grave. "She's stable, but it's serious. Several broken ribs, a shattered wrist, and a concussion from the fall. She was on the ladder helping to clean the chandelier when the ceiling mount gave way." "Can we see her?" Emma asked. "Briefly. She's sedated but conscious." Vivian lay pale against the white sheets, her normally vibrant presence diminished by pain and medicine. Her right arm was splinted and bandaged, and a purple bruise spread across her temple. "You two look worse than I feel," she murmured, attempting a smile that turned into a wince. Mason took her uninjured hand. "The Silver Dollar can wait. You focus on healing." "Nonsense," Vivian replied weakly. "Saturday's dance is the biggest of the season. The Harvest Festival brings everyone to town. We'll manage," Mason assured her, though Emma could see the worry in his eyes. The Harvest Festival dance was indeed crucial to the Silver Dollar's finances, bringing in revenue that helped sustain the business through the quieter winter months. After leaving Vivian to rest, they walked to the Silver Dollar to assess the damage. The main chandelier, a source of pride for the establishment with its dozens of oil lamps, lay in shattered pieces across the dance floor. The ceiling showed splintered wood where the mounting bracket had torn free. "Can it be repaired in time?" Emma asked, surveying the destruction. Mason shook his head. "Not the chandelier itself. We could hang lanterns, but it won't be the same. The Harvest Festival is known for its elegance. People come from 3 counties for this dance." Emma studied the debris thoughtfully. "What if we created something new, something even more impressive?" Mason looked at her with curiosity. "What do you have in mind?" Emma's experience with Boston society events sparked an idea. "In my father's house, we once hosted a winter ball where we suspended dozens of small mirrors among the candles. The light reflected created a magical effect like stars." "Mirrors are expensive," Mason noted. "And we have just 4 days." "Not if we use tin," Emma countered. "The metalsmith could cut small reflective pieces. We could suspend them with wire from the ceiling beams, interspersed with lanterns." As they discussed possibilities, Emma found herself excited by the creative challenge. This was something she could contribute beyond bookkeeping, a touch of Eastern refinement adapted to Western resources. The next few days passed in a flurry of activity. Emma divided her time between the ranch and town, coordinating repairs at the Silver Dollar while ensuring the ranch operations continued smoothly. Mason handled the physical labor of hanging the new lighting configuration following Emma's design. By Saturday afternoon, the transformation was complete. Hundreds of small tin mirrors hung at varying heights above the dance floor, with oil lamps strategically placed to maximize the reflection. The effect was even more enchanting than Emma had envisioned. The ceiling appeared to be filled with twinkling stars. "It's beautiful," Mason said, standing beside Emma as they admired their handiwork. "Better than the chandelier ever was." Emma felt a glow of pride. "Do you think Vivian will approve? She'll be furious she didn't think of it herself." His hand found hers, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Thank you, Emma, for everything these past weeks." The warmth of his touch lingered as Emma returned to her apartment to prepare for the evening. She had visited the Mercantile earlier in the week, splurging on a new dress for the occasion, a deep blue silk that complemented her eyes. It was more elegant than anything she'd worn since leaving Boston, with a cleverly designed cut that minimized the appearance of her limp when she walked. As she dressed, Emma reflected on how much had changed since that first Saturday dance. She had found not just employment or partnership, but purpose, respect, perhaps even a place where she truly belonged. The Harvest Festival dance exceeded all expectations. Visitors from neighboring communities gasped in delight at the sparkling ceiling. The mayor made a speech praising the silver dollar for its contribution to Clearwater's culture. Even Widow Parker attended, nodding approvingly at Emma across the crowded room. Throughout the evening, Emma alternated between observing from her seat and dancing the waltzes with Mason. Their partnership on the dance floor had grown more fluid. With practice, his subtle guidance making her movements appear almost graceful. During a break in the music, Emma slipped outside for fresh air. The night was clear, stars visible above the buildings of Clearwater mirroring the artificial stars they'd created inside. "There you are," Mason's voice came from behind her. "I was beginning to think you'd abandoned your post." Emma smiled as he joined her. "Just catching my breath. It's quite warm inside." "Are you happy, Emma?" The question was unexpected, his tone serious. She considered carefully before answering. "I am, more than I expected to be when I first arrived." Mason turned to face her directly. "When I first saw you at the station that day, struggling to maintain your dignity despite being abandoned, I admired your courage. I never imagined you'd become so essential to both my businesses and to me." Emma's heart quickened at the intensity in his gaze. "Mason, I'm not Thomas Harrington," he continued quietly. "I know the silver dollar and my past aren't what you journeyed west to find. But I've come to care for you, Emma, deeply." The declaration hung in the night air between them. Emma thought of the letters she'd exchanged with Thomas, formal, carefully worded missives between strangers. How different from the genuine understanding that had grown between her and Mason through working side by side, facing challenges together. "I came west seeking a partner who would value me for my mind and character," she said softly. "I never dreamed I would find exactly that in such unexpected circumstances." Mason took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "I'm not proposing another business arrangement, Emma." She smiled, her heart full. "I should hope not. We have quite enough of those already." As Mason drew her closer, Emma realized that what she had first perceived as abandonment at the Clearwater station had actually been the first step on a path to finding where she truly belonged, not as a mail-order bride defined by her limitations, but as a woman whose hidden grace had finally been recognized. The music from inside floated through the night air as their lips met in a first, tender kiss, the beginning of a partnership. Far deeper than either had imagined possible that fateful day at the station. Spring arrived in Montana territory with explosive suddenness. One week the ranch was gripped by winter's last stubborn grasp, and the next, wildflowers carpeted the lower meadows, while new calves wobbled alongside their mothers in the greening pastures. Emma stood on the ranch house porch, surveying the landscape that had become home over the past 6 months. The transformation from autumn to spring mirrored her own journey, from the cold uncertainty of abandonment to the warmth of belonging. "Penny for your thoughts," Mason said, joining her at the railing, 2 steaming coffee cups in hand. Emma accepted hers with a smile. "I was thinking about how quickly things change. This time last year I was in Boston, unmarried and with limited prospects. Now I'm in Montana, unmarried and co-owner of a successful cattle ranch." Mason's eyebrow quivered at her emphasis. "The unmarried part could be remedied, you know. I've only asked 3 times. And each time I've told you I need to be certain." Emma's tone was light, but her words carried the weight of genuine consideration. "Marriage isn't a business transaction, Mason." His expression softened. "I'm well aware. That's precisely why I'm willing to wait until you're ready." He gestured toward the valley below. "The ranch isn't going anywhere, neither am I." Their relationship had evolved gradually following their first kiss at the Harvest Festival. Mason courted Emma with formal Sunday afternoon rides and dinner at the small restaurant in town. He brought her wildflowers and books, ordered specially from Denver. And 3 times over the winter months, he had proposed marriage, each time accepting her request for more time with gracious understanding. It wasn't that Emma didn't care for Mason, quite the opposite. Her feelings had deepened into something profound and genuine. But the ghost of Thomas Harrington and her original purpose in coming west still lingered. She needed to be certain she wasn't simply transferring her expectations from one man to another, substituting one dream for a convenient replacement. "Frank mentioned the stream in the north pasture is running high with the melt," Emma said, changing the subject. "We should check the diversion channels today." Mason nodded, respecting her shift to business matters. Their partnership in running the ranch had flourished, with Emma's organizational skills complementing Mason's practical knowledge. The winter had been hard but manageable, and the spring cattle count showed promising numbers for the upcoming season. As they prepared to ride out to inspect the water channels, a rider appeared on the road from town. Emma recognized Bradley Thompson, the telegraph operator's assistant, urging his horse at unusual speed. "Telegram for you, Miss Wilson," the young man announced, reining to a stop and extending a yellow envelope. "Just came through, marked urgently." Emma's stomach tightened as she accepted the message. No one from her Boston life had contacted her since her departure nearly 8 months ago. Urgent news could only mean family tragedy. With slightly trembling fingers, she opened the envelope and read the brief message. "Father gravely ill stop, requests your presence, stop funds, wired for return journey, stop mother." The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. Her father, the one family member who had supported her decision to seek a new life, even if he hadn't fully approved of her method. "What is it?" Mason asked, his voice gentle with concern. "My father is dying," Emma replied, her voice barely audible. "My mother has sent for me." Mason's arm went around her shoulders, steadying her. "I'm so sorry, Emma. When will you leave?" The question wasn't if, but when. A recognition that despite the life she had built in Montana, some obligations transcended distance and circumstance. Emma was grateful for his immediate understanding. "The eastbound train departs tomorrow morning," Bradley offered. "I checked the schedule when the telegram arrived, knowing you'd want to leave quickly." Emma nodded her thanks, mind already racing through the preparations necessary for such a journey. "I'll need to be on it." By evening, Emma's trunk was packed for the return to Boston. Mason had arranged for Frank to manage daily ranch operations in their absence. "You don't need to accompany me," Emma insisted, as Mason added his own travel case to the wagon that would take them to the station at dawn. "The ranch needs you here with the calving season underway." "The ranch has Frank," Mason countered firmly. "You shouldn't make this journey alone. Besides," he added, with a gentler tone, I'd like to meet your family under any circumstances, even such difficult ones. Emma hadn't considered the implications of Mason accompanying her to Boston. Her mother's telegram had mentioned nothing about the unusual life her daughter had established in Montana. What would Martha Wilson make of Mason Reed, saloon owner, cattle rancher, and the man courting her imperfect daughter? The train journey east was a reverse mirror of Emma's westward trip, the vast expanses of prairie gradually giving way to more populated landscapes, civilized comforts increasing with each eastward mile. Yet unlike her hopeful solitude of the previous journey, Emma now had Mason's steady presence beside her. He proved an attentive travel companion, ensuring her comfort without hovering, distracting her from worry with card games and conversation about fellow passengers, and holding her when grief overwhelmed her quiet composure. "Tell me about your father," he encouraged during their third night on the train, as they sat in the near-empty observation car, watching moonlight silver the passing countryside. Emma smiled, despite her worry. "Henry Wilson is the kindest man I've ever known. A merchant by trade, a philosopher by nature. He taught me arithmetic by having me help with his inventory ledgers and refined my penmanship by letting me draft his business correspondence." "So that's where you learned your bookkeeping skills," Mason observed. He believed women should understand practical matters, even if society expected them only to manage household accounts. Emma's voice warmed with fond memories. "When my fever left me with a damaged leg, he was the one who insisted I continue my education. My mother wanted to shield me at home, but father said limitation of body needn't mean limitation of mind. A wise man. I look forward to telling him how valuable those skills have proven." Emma glanced at Mason, realizing she had never explicitly told him about her mother's opposition to her Western venture. "My mother may not be as welcoming as you expect. She didn't approve of my coming west as a mail-order bride. She considered it both desperate and improper." Mason's expression remained untroubled. "Then I shall have to demonstrate that her daughter has built a respectable life for herself, despite unconventional beginnings." As the train approached Boston, Emma felt the weight of her two worlds colliding. The formal manners and rigid social structures of her upbringing seemed foreign after months in the pragmatic atmosphere of Montana. Looking down at her practical travel dress, she wondered if even her appearance would seem unrefined to her mother's critical eye. Mason sensed her apprehension. "You belong in both worlds, Emma. That's a strength, not a weakness." The Wilson family, home on Marlborough Street, stood exactly as Emma remembered, a narrow but elegant brownstone in a respectable neighborhood, its facade maintaining the proper Boston reserve. Standing at the front steps, Emma smoothed her travel-wrinkled skirt and took a steadying breath before lifting the brass knocker. The door opened to reveal her mother, Martha Wilson, whose perfectly arranged silver-streaked hair and impeccable afternoon dress showed no sign of the family crisis. Only the slight redness around her eyes betrayed her distress. "Emma." She stepped forward to embrace her daughter briefly, her posture already stiffening at the sight of Mason standing respectfully behind. "You had a good time. Your father will be relieved." "Mother, this is Mason Reed," Emma said, drawing him forward. "My business partner and friend. Mason, my mother, Mrs. Martha Wilson." Mason removed his hat and offered a formal bow that would have satisfied even Boston society. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm deeply sorry for the circumstances of our meeting. Please, accept my condolences regarding Mr. Wilson's illness." Martha's expression registered surprise at his cultured manner, having clearly expected someone more rustic. "Mr. Reed, I didn't realize Emma would bring a companion." Her tone made it clear this unexpected addition complicated matters. "However, you're welcome to join us. The doctor is with Henry now. We can see him shortly." The Wilson home interior, reflected the family's comfortable but not ostentatious standing. Quality furnishings well maintained over decades, tasteful artwork, and the subtle indicators of mercantile success. Mason absorbed these details with unobtrusive interest as they were shown to the parlor. "How is father?" Emma asked, removing her gloves and hat. "Failing," Martha replied bluntly. "His heart. The doctor gives him perhaps a week." She gestured for them to sit. "He's been asking for you these past 3 days." "And my sisters, Caroline and Eleanor, arrived yesterday. Margaret and her husband are expected tomorrow from Philadelphia." Martha's gaze shifted to Mason, assessment in her eyes. "Mr. Reed, Emma's letters have been infrequent. May I ask how you came to accompany my daughter from Montana?" Before Mason could respond, the parlor door opened to admit a distinguished older man in a medical coat. "Mrs. Wilson, your husband is awake and comfortable for the moment. He's asking for Emma." Emma rose immediately. "Mother, please explain things to Mason while I see father." Following the doctor upstairs, Emma braced herself for what awaited. The master bedroom door stood ajar, lamplight casting a warm glow into the hallway. With a fortifying breath, she stepped inside. Henry Wilson lay propped against pillows, his once robust frame diminished by illness, his complexion ashen beneath thinning white hair. But his eyes, those keen, kind eyes that had always seen beyond Emma's disability to her true self, brightened at the sight of his middle daughter. "There's my brave girl," he said, his voice weaker, but warm with affection. "Come where I can see you properly." Emma crossed to the bedside, taking his outstretched hand. "I came as quickly as I could, father." "Montana must agree with you," he observed, studying her face. "You look well, strong, less haunted than when you left." Tears threatened, but Emma maintained her composure, knowing her father preferred fortitude to emotional displays. "I've found a place where I fit, just as you said I might." "Tell me everything," he urged, patting the edge of the bed beside him. "And don't spare details to protect an old man's sensibilities. I want to know if you've found happiness." For the next hour, as Henry drifted between alertness and exhaustion, Emma shared her Montana story, the shock of Thomas Harrington's death, Mason's timely appearance, her work at the Silver Dollar, and their eventual partnership in the ranch. She described the mountains, the raw beauty of the landscape, the freedom from societal judgments about her imperfection. "And this Mason Reed," Henry said when she paused. "He treats you well?" "With respect and kindness, as an equal." Emma met her father's searching gaze. "He sees me, father, all of me, not despite my limp, but somehow inclusive of it, as just one facet of who I am." A smile spread across Henry's tired face. "Then I must meet the man who has accomplished what Boston society could not, recognizing my daughter's true worth. He's downstairs. Mother is likely interrogating him thoroughly as we speak." Henry chuckled weakly. "Poor fellow. Your mother means well, but her view of propriety is rather narrow." His expression sobered. "She feared for you, Emma. We received your letter about Harrington's death and your employment at the saloon. Martha was convinced you'd fallen into ruin. I wrote again about the ranch partnership," Emma reminded him. "Surely that eased her mind. Your mother sees what she expects to see, but I knew you would find your way." He squeezed her hand with surprising strength. "Bring him up. I want to meet this man while my mind is still clear." When Emma returned to the parlor, she found Mason engaged in polite but strained conversation with her mother. The set of Martha's shoulders conveyed clear disapproval. "Father would like to meet you," Emma announced, ignoring the tension in the room. "He's having a stronger interval." Martha rose immediately. "Perhaps tomorrow will be better. Henry needs rest, and Mr. Reed must be tired from traveling." "I'm perfectly well, Mrs. Wilson," Mason replied diplomatically. And I would be honored to meet Mr. Wilson at his convenience, not mine. Emma led Mason upstairs, pausing outside her father's door. My mother has obviously shared her concerns about our arrangement. Mason's smile was reassuring. She loves you and wants to protect you. I can respect that while disagreeing with her assessment. Henry Wilson welcomed Mason with genuine interest, gesturing weakly for him to take the chair beside the bed. So you're the man who recognized my Emma's capabilities when Harrington could not. Thomas Harrington died before meeting Emma, sir. Mason corrected gently. I have no doubt he would have valued her as she deserves. I was simply fortunate enough to be present when she needed a new direction. Henry's shrewd gaze assessed the younger man. A diplomatic answer. Tell me about this ranch you run together. For the next half hour, Mason described the ranch operations, their business arrangement, and the community of Clearwater. He spoke with obvious respect when referring to Emma's contributions, attributing much of their success to her financial management and innovative ideas. And the saloon? Henry asked directly. My wife seems particularly disturbed by that aspect of your business. The Silver Dollar is a reputable establishment by frontier standards, Mason replied honestly. It serves as Clearwater's social center as much as a business. Under our partnership, it's become even more respected, hosting community events and traveling cultural performances. Henry nodded thoughtfully. Montana sounds quite different from Boston. The territories judge people more by their actions than their background or physical attributes, Mason said, his meaning clear. Emma has earned genuine respect in Clearwater through her own merit. When fatigue eventually overtook Henry, they bid him good night with promises to return in the morning. Outside the bedroom, Emma found her two older sisters waiting, curiosity evident in their expressions. Caroline, Eleanor, this is Mason Reed. Emma made the introductions with composed dignity. Mason, my sisters. Caroline, the eldest Wilson daughter, bore the strongest resemblance to their mother, both in appearance and manner. Her greeting was polite but reserved, her assessment of Mason openly skeptical. Eleanor, however, displayed more of their father's temperament, welcoming Mason with genuine warmth. Emma's letters mentioned a business partner, but failed to note how handsome he is, Eleanor teased, ignoring Caroline's disapproving glance. You must join us for dinner and tell us all about Montana. Is it truly as wild as the novels suggest? Mason handled the sisters' contrasting receptions with easy grace. Not nearly as wild as fiction would have you believe, though it has its moments of drama. Dinner proved a strained affair, with Martha maintaining cool formality, while Caroline followed her mother's lead. Eleanor, by contrast, peppered Mason with questions about life in the territories, clearly fascinated by her sister's unconventional path. Throughout the meal, Emma observed Mason navigating her family's complex dynamics with surprising skill, neither apologizing for their frontier lifestyle nor emphasizing its more shocking aspects. When the women withdrew to the parlor afterward, leaving Mason briefly alone, as Boston tradition dictated, despite the absence of other gentlemen, Caroline seized the opportunity for direct questioning. What exactly are your intentions toward our sister, Mr. Reed? A business partnership seems an unusual arrangement for an unmarried woman. Martha nodded approvingly at her eldest daughter's directness. Indeed. While Emma's situation after the unfortunate incident with her intended was dire, surely she could have found more suitable employment. Emma intervened before Mason could respond. My arrangement with Mason has provided me with financial independence and respectable standing in Clearwater. The community accepts our partnership without scandal. A frontier town's standards hardly compare to Boston's, Caroline noted primly. Perhaps Boston's standards need reconsideration, Eleanor suggested, earning a sharp look from her mother. Emma appears happier and more confident than I've ever seen her. When Mason rejoined them, he brought the conversation to the practical matters at hand. Mrs. Wilson, Emma will naturally wish to remain in Boston as long as her father's condition requires. I'm prepared to return to Montana alone if necessary, to manage the ranch until she can return. Martha's surprise at this selfless offer was evident. That's... Consider it, Mr. Reed. Emma touched Mason's arm lightly. We should discuss this privately. Much depends on Father's situation in the coming days. The days that followed established a somber rhythm. Emma spent mornings and evenings at her father's bedside, sharing memories and receiving his subtle guidance for her future. Between these vigils, she accompanied Mason on brief walks through Boston, showing him the city of her upbringing. Henry Wilson's decline progressed with the relentless certainty the doctor had predicted. By the 5th day after Emma's arrival, he was confined to bed entirely, drifting in and out of lucidity. On the morning of the 6th day, he requested a private moment with Mason. When Mason emerged from the sick room an hour later, his expression was solemn but resolute. He found Emma waiting in the hallway, anxiety evident in her posture. "Your father is a remarkable man," Mason said simply. "He asked about my intentions toward you." Emma bit her lip. "And what did you tell him?" "The truth. That I love you and hope to marry you, but only when you're ready." Mason took her hands gently. "He gave me his blessing, Emma, and made me promise to ensure you visit Boston occasionally so your mother can see her grandchildren." Tears spilled down Emma's cheeks. "He's always been able to see what matters most. He also made me promise something else," Mason continued softly, "that we wouldn't delay our happiness out of uncertainty or fear. He said life is too precious and too short for such hesitation." That evening, Henry Wilson gathered his remaining strength for a final family dinner in his room, propped up in his bed while his wife and daughters shared a meal around him. Even Mason was included, a significant concession from Martha, who had gradually thawed toward him upon witnessing his obvious devotion to Emma. "I have one last request," Henry announced as the meal concluded. "I would like to see Emma and Mason married before I go." He raised a hand to forestall his wife's objection. "Nothing elaborate, Martha, just family, here in this room, tomorrow. Reverend Phillips can perform the ceremony." The silence that followed was broken by Emma's quiet voice. "If Mason agrees, I would be honored to fulfill your wish, Father." Mason's gaze held hers across the room, filled with unspoken emotion. "There's nothing I want more." Martha's lips pressed into a thin line, but seeing her husband's peaceful smile, she nodded reluctantly. "I'll speak to Reverend Phillips first thing tomorrow." The following afternoon, Emma stood beside Mason near her father's bedside, wearing her best blue traveling dress adorned with a small brooch of her grandmother's pearls. Her sisters stood witness, along with her mother, whose rigid posture had softened slightly in the face of her husband's evident joy. Reverend Phillips conducted a brief but meaningful ceremony, his voice solemn in the hushed bedroom. When the moment came for the exchange of rings, Mason surprised Emma by producing not only a simple gold band, but a delicate chain from which hung a small golden star, its center set with a tiny diamond that caught the afternoon light. "A star, to remember our first real dance," he whispered as he fastened it around her neck after placing the ring on her finger. Henry Wilson watched the conclusion of the ceremony with peaceful satisfaction in his tired eyes. "Now I can go knowing you're both exactly where you belong," he told Emma when she knelt beside him afterward, "with someone who sees your true grace." 2 days later, Henry Wilson passed quietly in his sleep, his family gathered around him. The funeral was attended by Boston's merchant community and old family friends, many of whom regarded Mason with curious appraisal, and Emma with the familiar mixture of pity and discomfort she remembered from her youth. Yet Emma found herself strangely unmoved by their assessment. The confidence she had developed in Montana remained intact, a protective shield against the whispers and sidelong glances. With Mason beside her, matching his steps to accommodate her distinctive gait, she greeted mourners with composed dignity. "Your father would be proud," Martha said unexpectedly as they returned to the house after the burial. It was the closest she had come to approving Emma's choices. The journey back to Montana a week later carried a bittersweet quality. Grief for her father mingled with anticipation of returning to the life and home she had built for herself. As the train carried them westward, Emma nestled against Mason's shoulder, watching the landscape gradually transform from settled civilization to open frontier. "What are you thinking?" Mason asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Emma touched the golden star at her throat. "About journeys. How I left Boston thinking I knew exactly what awaited me, only to discover everything would be different than I imagined." "Do you regret it? Coming west?" She shook her head. "How could I? It led me to where I truly belong." She smiled up at him. "Father once told me that some people search their whole lives for a place that accepts them completely. I found mine when I least expected it." As the train carried them toward the mountains, Emma reflected on the strange twist of fate that had left her alone and abandoned at Clearwater Station nearly 9 months ago. What had seemed at the time like the end of her hopes had instead been the beginning of something far more meaningful, a life built on mutual respect and genuine love, where her limp was merely an afterthought rather than her defining characteristic. The mail-order bride with a limp had indeed been abandoned at the station, but in that abandonment she had found her hidden grace, and a man with the wisdom to recognize it. 2 years had transformed the Reed Ranch almost beyond recognition. What had once been Thomas Harrington's modest cattle operation had expanded to include 3 additional pastures, an apple orchard beginning to bear fruit, and a newly constructed barn that housed the prize bulls Mason had purchased from a breeder in Colorado. But the most significant change stood in the yard on this bright summer morning. A small boy of 15 months, toddling determinedly after a chicken, his copper hair catching the sunlight, his laughter floating on the breeze. "Henry, don't terrorize the poor birds," Emma called from the porch, where she sorted through seed packets for the kitchen garden. Her son paid no attention, continuing his wobbly pursuit with the single-minded focus of a child his age. Mason emerged from the barn, immediately spotting his son's mission. With swift strides, he intercepted the boy, swinging him high into the air to peals of delighted giggles. "Terrorizing the livestock again, little man?" he asked, settling Henry on his shoulders. "Your mother and I are trying to run a respectable ranch here." Emma smiled at the pair as they approached the porch. These quiet family moments still caught her by surprise sometimes. The sheer ordinariness of their happiness, so different from what she had once believed possible for a woman with her limitations. "Frank rode in from town with the mail," Mason said, lifting Henry down to the porch. "Letter from Boston." Emma accepted the envelope, recognizing her mother's precise handwriting. The correspondence between them had grown more regular since Henry's birth, though Martha Wilson's letters still bore the faint undercurrent of disapproval regarding her daughter's Western life. "And another from Vivian," Mason added, producing a second letter. "Probably updates on the Silver Dollar renovations." Their partnership in the saloon continued, though they had sold a larger share to Vivian after Henry's birth. Emma still maintained the financial records, riding into town twice monthly to review the books, but the day-to-day operations remained firmly in Vivian's capable hands. She mentioned possibly adding a proper theatre section, Emma recalled, setting aside her mother's letter to open Vivian's first. "The travelling shows have been increasingly profitable." As she scanned the contents, her expression shifted from interest to surprise. Mason, listen to this. You'll never guess who arrived on yesterday's train. A certain Mr. James Harrington, claiming to be Thomas's cousin from back east. Says he only just learned of Thomas's death and has come to inquire about the property. Handsome fellow, speaks like an educated man. Simmons is checking the legal claims, but thought you should know immediately. Mason frowned, lifting Henry as the boy attempted to climb down the porch steps. Thomas never mentioned family, not to me, nor to Frank from what he said. Nor in any of his letters to me, Emma confirmed, her mind racing through implications. Could there be a legitimate claim after all this time? Legally, I doubt it. We purchased the property through proper channels, with the bank's full cooperation. Mason's expression grew thoughtful. Still, it bears looking into. Perhaps we should ride into town tomorrow. Henry squirmed in his father's arms, reaching toward Emma. Mama, down! Emma tucked the letters into her pocket and held out her arms. Come here, my busy boy, time for your nap. After settling Henry in his crib, Emma returned to find Mason on the porch, his expression troubled. I've been thinking about this Harrington cousin, he said as she joined him. The timing seems suspicious. The ranch is finally showing significant profit. Word about the new breeding program has spread. You think he's an opportunist rather than a relative. It wouldn't be the first time someone tried to claim kinship to secure property. Mason ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Emma recognized as signaling deep concern. I should ride into town today, speak with Simmons directly. Emma nodded. I'll come with you. Mrs. Caldwell can watch Henry for a few hours. The ride to Clearwater gave them time to discuss the situation further. Clearwater had grown considerably in the past 2 years, with new buildings stretching along what had once been the edge of town. The silver dollar remained prominently positioned on the main street, its recently repainted facade gleaming in the afternoon sun. They found James Simmons in his office, reviewing documents with a man whose fine Eastern suit immediately marked him as a newcomer. The stranger rose as they entered, tall, well-built, with features that bore a passing resemblance to the photograph Emma had once seen of Thomas Harrington. Mr. and Mrs. Reed, Simmons greeted them. Allow me to introduce Mr. James Harrington, from Philadelphia. Mr. Harrington, these are the current owners of what was once your cousin's ranch. The man offered a polished bow. A pleasure, though under awkward circumstances. I only recently learned of my cousin Thomas's unfortunate passing. Emma studied him carefully. Though his manners were impeccable, something in his expression struck her as calculated. How curious that Thomas never mentioned Philadelphia relatives in our correspondence. We exchanged letters for 8 months prior to my journey west. A flash of something, surprise perhaps, crossed James Harrington's face before his smooth expression returned. Thomas and I weren't close as adults. Family disagreements, you understand. I've been abroad for several years and only returned to Philadelphia this spring, where I learned of his death from a mutual acquaintance. Mason's stance remained relaxed, but Emma recognized the vigilance in his eyes. What brings you to Clearwater now, Mr. Harrington? As I understand it, your cousin's property was legally transferred following his death. Indeed, and I have no intention of disputing your ownership, Harrington assured them with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I merely wished to see where Thomas spent his final years, perhaps collect a few personal mementos if any remain. Simmons cleared his throat. Mr. Harrington has provided some family documentation that does suggest a connection to Thomas, a birth certificate showing the same grandparents, letters between their fathers. Which would make you second cousins, Emma noted. Rather distant. For such a sentimental journey. Harrington's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Family connections hold different meanings for different people, Mrs. Reed. I'm actually planning to settle in Montana territory myself, looking for investment. Opportunities. When I learned of my cousin's ranch, it seemed a natural place to begin my inquiries. The conversation continued for another half hour, with James Harrington inquiring about various aspects of the region's cattle industry and property values. Throughout, Emma sensed an underlying purpose beyond his stated intentions, though she couldn't quite identify what it might be. As they prepared to leave, Harrington made an unexpected request. "Might I impose upon your hospitality to visit the ranch tomorrow, purely to see my cousin's final home? It would mean a great deal." Mason and Emma exchanged glances, a silent communication born of their years together. "You're welcome to ride out mid-morning," Mason finally replied. "We'll show you the property." Outside Simmons's office, they made their way to the Silver Dollar to speak with Vivian. The saloon was quiet in the afternoon hours, with only a few patrons playing cards at the corner tables. "I don't trust him," Vivian declared bluntly after hearing their account. "Too polished, too convenient in his timing, and there's something familiar about him I can't quite place." "You've seen him before?" Emma asked. Vivian shook her head. "Not exactly, but something in his manner reminds me of someone. It'll come to me." That evening, after returning to the ranch and relieving Mrs. Caldwell of her childcare duties, Emma sat on the porch swing with Henry sleeping against her shoulder. The peaceful moment contrasted sharply with her unsettled thoughts. "What are you thinking?" Mason asked, joining her on the swing. "About Thomas Harrington, the real Thomas." Emma gazed out at the ranch that had become their home. "Sometimes I wonder what might have happened had he lived. Would I have been happy as his wife?" Mason considered this thoughtfully. "I believe you would have built a good life together. He created this place with care and vision. Your letters moved him to prepare a home worthy of the woman he'd chosen." Emma appreciated his lack of jealousy, the security in their relationship that allowed such honest reflection. And now this cousin appears, claiming connection to a man who, by all accounts, kept to himself and mentioned no family ties. "We'll be watchful," Mason assured her. "Simmons is reviewing the legal documents more thoroughly. If this James Harrington has ulterior motives, we'll discover them." The following morning brought their visitor as arranged. James Harrington arrived on a rented horse, dressed more practically than the previous day, though his riding clothes still marked him as Eastern rather than frontier. Emma observed him carefully as Mason led him on a tour of the ranch operations. Harrington asked detailed questions about the cattle business, showing particular interest in the water rights and property boundaries. When they reached the main house, his gaze lingered on the improvements they had made to Thomas Harrington's original structure. "You've expanded considerably," he noted. Thomas's letters described a more modest dwelling. The casual mention of letters from Thomas immediately caught Emma's attention. "You corresponded with your cousin recently, then?" A flicker of realization crossed Harrington's face, a misstep revealed. "Some years ago, before my travels abroad, he described his plans for the homestead. During lunch, served on the porch to catch the summer breeze, Henry woke from his nap. Mrs. Caldwell brought him out, his copper hair tousled from sleep, his curious gaze fixing immediately on the stranger. "Your son, I presume?" Harrington inquired, watching as Henry made his way directly to Mason's chair, lifting his arms to be picked up. "Yes, our Henry," Emma confirmed, noting the calculating assessment in their visitor's eyes as he observed the family tableau. The afternoon concluded with Harrington expressing elaborate thanks for their hospitality. As Mason escorted him to his horse, Emma noticed their visitor casting one last measuring look at the property before riding away. "He's planning something," she told Mason after Harrington had departed. "The questions about water rights, his interest in the property boundaries, those aren't the concerns of a man making a sentimental journey." Mason nodded grimly. "I noticed the same. We should send word to Simmons to dig deeper into his background. Little did they know that James Harrington's true identity and purpose would soon emerge, threatening not just their ownership of the ranch, but the very fabric of the life they had built together. A challenge that would test the strength of a partnership in ways they could not yet imagine. The truth about James Harrington emerged with unexpected swiftness. 3 days after his visit to the ranch, a telegram arrived from Philadelphia in response to Simmons' inquiries. There was no record of a James Harrington related to Thomas Harrington, who had settled in Montana territory. A complete fraud, Mason declared, pacing the ranch house kitchen as Emma prepared breakfast. But what's his actual game? The answer came that very afternoon, when Frank Caldwell rode in from town, his expression unusually grim. "Got news from Simmons," he announced, declining Emma's offer of coffee. "That Harrington fellow filed a claim with the land office yesterday. Says he has proof the original property boundaries extend 3 miles farther north than recorded, including Carson Creek and the entire north pasture." Mason's expression darkened. "Carson Creek is our primary water source for the new herd." "Exactly," Frank confirmed. "Without it, that pasture's nearly worthless in the dry season. And here's the kicker. He's got surveyor's documents with Thomas. Harrington's signature showing the larger boundaries." Emma set down the plate she was holding. "Forgeries, obviously. But how would he have access to Thomas's signature to copy?" "That's what has me worried," Mason said quietly. "Someone with local knowledge must be helping him." That evening, after Henry was asleep, Emma sorted through the wooden box where she kept Thomas Harrington's letters. "His signature is on all of these," she noted. "Anyone who gained access could have copied it." "Who knew you had these letters?" Mason asked, examining the distinctive handwriting. Emma considered. "You, Vivian, Frank. Widow Parker knew about them, and I mentioned them to several people when I first arrived, trying to locate Thomas." "Too many possibilities," Mason sighed, "but the forged survey documents concern me more. Creating those would require knowledge of property law and local geography." Their answer arrived unexpectedly the following morning in the form of Vivian, who rode out to the ranch before breakfast, her typically immaculate appearance disheveled from hard riding. "I remembered where I'd seen him before," she announced without preamble, accepting the coffee Emma offered. "Not his face, but his manner, the way he holds himself, certain expressions. He reminds me of Walter Jenkins." "Our former bookkeeper?" Emma asked, puzzled. "The one who embezzled from us," Mason clarified, his expression sharpening. "But Walter left the territory 2 years ago." Vivian nodded. "And I'd bet my share of the silver dollar that James Harrington is either working with him or paid him for information. Walter had access to all our business dealings, including your purchase of this ranch. He knew Thomas Harrington's history, handled correspondence for many businesses in town." The pieces suddenly aligned in Emma's mind. Walter could have seen Thomas's letters when they came through the telegraph office. He handled document filings for Simmons occasionally. "And he had a gambling problem," Mason added grimly. "The type of man who might sell information to someone planning a land fraud scheme." "The timing makes sense too," Emma realized. "Walter disappeared right after I discovered the discrepancies in the Silver Dollars books. He would have known which properties in the area might be vulnerable to such schemes." Frank stroked his weathered chin thoughtfully. "Come to think of it, there was a stranger asking questions about property boundaries at the Cattlemen's Association meeting last month. Claimed to be from the Territorial Surveyor's Office. Nobody thought much of it at the time. They've been planning this for a while," Mason concluded. "Gathering information, identifying targets, creating forged documents." A plan formed quickly. Mason would ride to the county seat where the land office was located, bringing Simmons and the original property documents. Emma would remain at the ranch with Frank in the hands, ensuring that James Harrington couldn't make any physical claim to the disputed territory. Vivian would make inquiries among her connections in neighboring towns, trying to locate Walter Jenkins or any associates. "Take 2 of the hands with you," Emma insisted as Mason prepared to leave. "I don't trust this man not to try something." Underhanded on the road, Mason nodded, recognizing the wisdom in her caution. "Send word immediately if Harrington or anyone suspicious approaches the ranch, and keep Henry close to the house." The morning of Mason's departure brought a spectacular sunrise that painted the eastern sky in vivid golds and crimsons. Emma stood on the porch, Henry balanced on her hip, watching as Mason and his companions disappeared over the ridge. Despite the worry gnawing at her, she maintained a calm demeanor for the ranch hands, issuing daily instructions with her usual efficiency. That afternoon, she organized an inventory of their resources, feed stores, cattle numbers, cash reserves, calculating how long they could withstand a legal siege. The picture wasn't encouraging. Their assets were substantial, but largely non-liquid, tied up in land improvements and livestock. A prolonged court battle would strain them considerably. The following day brought unexpected developments. While Mason was still away, a wagon arrived at the ranch bearing Widow Parker, who rarely left town these days. "Thought you should know," she announced after accepting Emma's invitation to sit on the porch. "That fancy Easterner's been asking questions all over town about your husband's businesses. Particularly interested in the Silver Dollar's finances, bought drinks for Williams from the bank, trying to learn about your loans and such." Emma frowned. "He's building a complete picture of our vulnerabilities." "Seems that way," the widow agreed. "Reminds me of those mining claim jumpers from back in '85, find a weakness, exploit it through legal channels, then offer to settle for a portion rather than take everything. You think that's his strategy, force us into a settlement?" The widow nodded, accepting the lemonade Emma offered. "Men like that don't want the hassle of running a working ranch. They want quick profit. He'll push until you offer to buy him off, then move on to his next mark." Emma's jaw set with determination. "He's underestimated us, if he thinks we'll surrender. Any part of what we've built, that limp of yours, fools people," Widow Parker observed with a knowing smile. "Makes them think you're weaker than you are. Been watching you prove them wrong for years now." After the widow departed, Emma sat at her desk penning letters to several of Mason's business associates in neighboring towns. If they needed to gather funds quickly, she wanted options beyond simply selling livestock at depressed prices. That evening, as she tucked Henry into bed, the boy asked for his father with the innocent directness of a child. "Papa home soon?" "Very soon," Emma assured him, smoothing his copper curls. "He's taking care of important business for our ranch." "Our ranch," Henry repeated sleepily, secure in the certainty of his place in the world. Emma lingered in the doorway, watching her son drift into peaceful slumber, unaware of the threats to his inheritance. In that moment, her resolve hardened further. This land wasn't merely property, it was Henry's birthright, the legacy they were building for future generations. The next morning brought 2 unexpected visitors, the sheriff and a young, nervous-looking man Emma didn't recognize. She received them in the parlor, maintaining a composed exterior despite her racing heart. "Mrs. Reed," the sheriff began, removing his hat, "this here is Timothy Collins, works at the land office. He's got some information he thought you should hear directly." The young man twisted his hat in his hands. "Ma'am, that fellow claiming to be James Harrington came by yesterday with more papers. Asked me to expedite the boundary dispute filing, ahead of normal procedures." He swallowed hard. "Offered me $20 to rush it through without the usual verification steps." Emma leaned forward. "And did you accept?" "No, ma'am," Collins replied firmly. "My pa owns the mercantile. He taught me better than that. But I pretended to agree so I could find out more about what he's planning, which is He's got a buyer lined up for the water rights to Carson Creek if his claim is validated. Some mining operations want to divert the water, the whole boundary. Dispute is just a means to get control of the creek. This new information casts the situation in an even more alarming light. Without Carson Creek, not just the North Pasture but much of their grazing land would become untenable during drought. Years, essentially devaluing the entire ranch. By the time Mason returned 2 days later, the situation had evolved further. James Harrington had established himself in town, renting rooms above the Mercantile and making a show of consulting with a man he introduced as his attorney from Helena. The land office is holding judgment until a proper survey can be conducted, Mason reported, exhaustion evident in his voice. Simmons filed a counterclaim and original documents, but this could drag on for months and drain our resources in legal fees, Emma noted, recognizing the strategy. He's hoping to force a settlement. Mason nodded grimly. That seems to be the plan. Emma shared what she'd learned about the water rights scheme. This isn't just about extracting money from us through a settlement. If he gains control of Carson Creek, he could essentially render the ranch worthless, then buy it for a fraction of its value. Clever, Mason admitted reluctantly, and difficult to combat through normal legal channels, even with the original boundary documents. These land disputes can take years to resolve. That night, after Henry's bedtime, Emma sat at the kitchen table reviewing their financial position. The ranch was profitable, but cash reserves were tied up in the new breeding program. Fighting a prolonged legal battle would strain their resources considerably. We could sell part of the herd, Mason suggested, watching her calculations. That would undermine everything we've built, Emma replied. There must be another solution. Her gaze fell on the small wooden box of Thomas Harrington's letters. Suddenly, an idea formed, one that might turn the tables on their adversary. Thomas mentioned family in several letters, she said, pulling the box closer. Not Philadelphia relations, but Boston. He never gave names, but spoke of corresponding with a cousin there about his ranch development. Mason leaned forward with renewed interest. If we could locate this actual cousin, we'd have a legitimate Harrington to counter our imposter's claims, Emma finished. Someone who might have evidence of the true property boundaries from Thomas's own correspondence. The following morning, Emma rode into town alone, the box of letters secured in her saddlebag. Her destination wasn't Simmons's office, but the telegraph office, where she spent nearly an hour sending a detailed message east to her mother in Boston, requesting urgent inquiries into the Harrington family connections there. Emma's mother, despite her continued ambivalence about her daughter's Western life, maintained active connections throughout Boston society. If anyone could quickly locate Thomas Harrington's relatives, it would be Martha Wilson. Over the next week, a strange stalemate developed. James Harrington made daily appearances around Clearwater, continuing his campaign of subtle information gathering. Mason and Emma maintained their normal routines, betraying no sign of the concern they felt. Henry remained blissfully unaware of the tension, continuing his toddler explorations of the ranch with undiminished enthusiasm. Emma's days fell into a pattern of heightened vigilance. She instructed the ranch hands to report any strangers approaching the property and arranged for one of the men to escort her during necessary trips to town. Though their impostor had thus far operated through legal channels, she sensed his growing impatience. A desperate man might resort to more direct methods if his scheme appeared threatened. Her caution proved warranted when, returning from delivering eggs to Widow Parker, Emma noticed hoofprints diverging from the main trail toward their north boundary line. Following her instincts, she directed her horse along the suspicious tracks, maintaining a cautious distance. At the ridge overlooking Carson Creek, she spotted two riders, James Harrington and his supposed attorney, examining the landscape and consulting what appeared to be a map. Though too distant to hear their conversation, Their intense scrutiny of the watershed confirmed their designs on the water rights. Emma remained hidden until they departed, then made her own careful inspection of the area. Small wooden stakes had been driven into the ground at intervals, unofficial survey markers establishing the boundary line claimed in their fraudulent documents. That evening she reported her discovery to Mason. They're preparing to physically demonstrate their claim. Those stakes will be presented as evidence of long-standing boundary markers if the case goes before a judge. Bold, Mason acknowledged, but it tells us they're getting anxious. Perhaps our countermeasures are making them nervous. The telegraph operator's assistant arrived the following morning with the response they'd been awaiting. Martha Wilson had located Jonathan Harrington, a Boston merchant who confirmed his cousin's relationship with the late Thomas. More importantly, he was willing to travel to Montana immediately, bringing family documents and correspondence that would establish the legitimate property boundaries. Then came the day when everything changed. Emma was in the garden, harvesting summer vegetables, when she spotted two riders approaching, Mason, who had gone to town for supplies, and a stranger on a fine bay horse. As they drew closer, Emma recognized the elegant posture and fashionable attire of a Boston gentleman. Wiping her hands on her apron, she moved to the porch to greet them, curiosity mingling with cautious hope. "Emma," Mason called as they dismounted, "may I present Mr. Jonathan Harrington from Boston?" "Thomas Harrington's actual cousin," the newcomer bowed politely. Unlike the fraudulent James, this man was older, perhaps 50, with the same coloring Thomas had possessed in his photograph. "Mrs. Reed, a pleasure to meet you, though I regret the circumstances." "Mr. Harrington responded to my telegram," Emma explained as they settled in the parlor. "I remembered Thomas mentioning a cousin in Boston, though not by name, in one of his early letters. When our imposter claimed Philadelphia connections, it struck me as wrong." Jonathan Harrington nodded, accepting the coffee Emma offered. "Thomas and I corresponded regularly until his death. He mentioned his intentions regarding a mail-order bride quite enthusiastically in his final year." His expression darkened. "When your telegram described this impostor and his claims, I consulted my own correspondence from Thomas. The property boundaries he described never included Carson Creek. That was land he hoped to purchase eventually, but never claimed ownership of." "Do you have these letters with you?" Mason asked. "Indeed, along with the original family documents that prove my relationship to Thomas. I've already shown them to your lawyer, Mr. Simmons." Jonathan's expression was grim but satisfied. "He's presenting them to the marshal as we speak." Over dinner, Jonathan shared stories of his youth with Thomas, their childhood summers spent on the family's small New Hampshire farm, Thomas's early fascination with the Western Territories, his methodical planning before making the journey. He was always meticulous about documentation, kept copies of every important paper, noted every transaction. The idea that he would have unclear property boundaries is preposterous to anyone who knew him. The confrontation occurred the following day on Clearwater's main street. James Harrington, whose real name proved to be Edward Milburn, a known confidence man from St. Louis, was arrested along with his attorney and a third conspirator. None other than Walter Jenkins, the former bookkeeper whose knowledge had enabled the scheme. "They've pulled this same land fraud in 3 other territories," the marshal explained to Mason and Emma afterward. "Find prosperous properties with complicated ownership histories, forge documents claiming boundary disputes, then extract settlements from owners who can't afford lengthy legal battles." Emma felt a peculiar satisfaction watching the men being led to the jail. Walter Jenkins had the grace to look ashamed when he caught her eye, but Milburn maintained his arrogant bearing despite the manacles on his wrists. "You may have stopped me," he called to Mason as they passed, "but there'll be others. This territory's ripe for men with vision and ambition." True ambition builds something lasting, Mason replied evenly. It doesn't steal what others have created. The town buzzed for weeks with the drama of the thwarted land scheme. Emma found herself the recipient of numerous visitors, eager neighbors seeking first-hand accounts of how she had uncovered the fraud and contacted the real Harrington heir. Jonathan Harrington remained in Clearwater for a week, sharing stories of the cousin Emma had never met and touring the ranch that had been Thomas's pride. He would be pleased to see what you've built here, he told them on his final evening. Thomas valued industry and vision above all else. Before departing, Jonathan presented them with an unexpected gift, a leather portfolio containing Thomas's original plans for the ranch, including sketches for future expansions he had never lived to implement. "These belong here," he said simply, "with the people who are fulfilling his dream." After Jonathan's departure back east, life at the Reed Ranch gradually returned to normal. The experience had been unsettling, but ultimately strengthening, proving that the partnership Emma and Mason had built could withstand external threats. "You know," Mason remarked one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "In a strange way, we should thank our imposter." Emma raised an eyebrow. "For attempting to steal our water rights and devalue our property. For forcing us to dig deeper into Thomas's history." He reached for her hand, his expression thoughtful. "Meeting Jonathan, seeing Thomas's plans, it was like closing a circle, connecting our present to the past that brought you here." Emma understood his meaning. Thomas Harrington's legacy wasn't just the physical ranch, but the chain of events. His death had set in motion her meeting with Mason, their partnership, their family. The attempted fraud had paradoxically strengthened their claim to this life, both legally and emotionally. The seasons turned, bringing harsh winter snows followed by the vibrant rebirth of spring. Emma discovered she was expecting their second child as the first wildflowers dotted the meadows. By summer's height, her condition was obvious, prompting Henry's curious questions about the changes in his mother's appearance. On the one-year anniversary of the imposter incident, they hosted a barn dance to celebrate the newest addition to their family, a daughter they named Vivian Martha Reed, her middle name a peace offering to Emma's mother, who had finally accepted an invitation to visit her Western grandchildren. Martha Wilson arrived 2 weeks before Emma's confinement, her initial discomfort with frontier life gradually giving way to grudging appreciation for the empire her daughter had helped build. When little Vivian Martha made her entrance into the world, earlier and more dramatically than expected, with only Widow Parker and Martha in attendance as Mason was delayed in town, it was her grandmother who first declared her a fighter like her mother. As lanterns illuminated the new barn and fiddle music filled the night air during the celebration, Emma watched Mason teaching little Henry to do-si-do, their son's infectious laughter rising above the music. Nearby, her mother sat in conversation, with Widow Parker, tentative friendship forming between the proper Bostonian and the frontier businesswoman. Vivian appeared at Emma's side, the baby asleep in her arms. "Hard to believe this all started with you, standing alone at that train station," she remarked. "Look what you've built since then." Emma's fingers touched the golden star she still wore around her neck. "I thought I'd lost everything that day. Instead, I found where I truly belonged." Later, as Mason claimed her for a waltz beneath the stars, Emma moved with the confidence of a woman who knew her worth. Her distinctive gait now as much a part of her grace as her upright carriage and warm smile. "Happy?" Mason asked, guiding her in a gentle turn. Emma surveyed the gathering, their ranch hands and neighbors, their children, the community that had accepted her completely. "Beyond anything I could have imagined when I stepped off that train." As the music carried them across the barn floor, Emma reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. The mail-order bride with a limp had been abandoned at the station, but in that seeming misfortune, she had found something far more precious than what she'd originally sought. A man who saw her true worth, a community that valued her abilities, and the strength within herself that had been there all along, waiting for the right circumstances to shine. In the end, what might have been her greatest tragedy had become her most profound blessing, proof that sometimes life's most difficult moments were merely doorways to unexpected joy. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.